Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Herbert Hoover, the Herbert Hoover moratorium of June 20th, 1931. What did it do? To remove some of the unnecessary historical context, it basically said Germany has financial debts to France and Britain. France and Britain have financial debts to the United States. These are the main countries of the time. And it's Herbert Hoover proposing, after consulting with leaders of Congress and getting the support of quite a group of them, proposed a payment stop, a freeze on payment, a moratorium on reparations debt, because that's what it was largely, reparation debt from Germany to France and Britain, and war debts from France and Britain to the United States government. So we're talking government debt, with the United States being one of the main recipients, and God knows Hoover needed the money in order to keep going during that depression. He was always facing revenue shortfalls, obviously, because there was a world depression. So he came forward with this, and it was greeted with relief, in particular in Germany and elsewhere. The French ruined significant parts of the effect of this by stalling for 2 to 3 weeks from June 20th, 1931 until July 7th, July 8th. And by that time, the German banking crisis was on. What Pierre Laval did in France with Flandin, the finance minister, is similar to what stupid Merkel and Schäuble, the very sinister German finance minister, and Axel Weber of the Bundesbank and the European Central Bank, what they've done now is to stall the stuff on Greece. So even in their own terms, their bailout, which we condemn anyway, is also going to be ineffective in the way that they wanted it to be done. It's not going to work. It's really too late for bailouts. So what we're saying is, if Herbert Hoover in 1931 could propose a debt freeze, essentially among Germany, France, Britain, and the United States, the main countries of the world at the time, is there nobody who has the brains or the guts or some combination thereof to come forward with this? You can see my Russia Today interview of yesterday, Thursday, May 6th, which is up at tarpley.net. It's an appeal to do this. Sarkozy, somebody. You could think of some others. The Pope might do it. Somebody needs to do this. Is there nobody who's going to save humanity from the crushing weight of this international financial debt? Now, you'd also say, well, these people today are inferior to Herbert Hoover. They are. On the other hand, we could say the leading monster in the Herbert Hoover cabinet was, of course, the Treasury Secretary, Andrew Mellon, the most sinister sort of Austrian school type. Remember, his demand was always immediate deflationary crash. I think this is what Peter Schiff and some others have been reading, the works of Andrew Mellon. He was known as a leave-it-alone liquidationist, and his litany was liquidate stocks, liquidate bonds, liquidate labor, liquidate the farmer, liquidate real estate, liquidate it all, and then you'll have a recovery, thanks to the mysterious business cycle. And I always add, too bad if you died in the process. Too bad if a whole generation is destroyed in the process and driven into despair and alcoholism and God knows what. Anyway, that's Mellon. Mellon, when Herbert Hoover brought up the idea of a debt moratorium as the German crisis, the Austrian crisis of the Kreditanstalt of May 1931, 79 years ago this week, as this was getting worse, Herbert Hoover discussed the debt moratorium in the cabinet, and Mellon was against it. Said, no, it's their mess. We're not going to get involved. They should pay. They hired the money, didn't they, Coolidge? But then he took a trip to Europe, and he went to the British, and the British were already telling him, if we don't do something to stop the fall of Germany, then we're going to have the British pound collapsing in a couple of months, which is exactly what they got. So Andrew Mellon, the biggest monster of them all, the worst guy in the entire Herbert Hoover cabinet and the whole U.S. 1920s, turns out and says, I want this debt freeze for the sake of the British, but still he wants it. He's got the brains to see what's going to happen next. That seems to be lacking for Merkel and Trichet and the rest of these people. And, of course, Henry Stimson, the gray eminence of the U.S. Eastern Anglophile liberal establishment, the ego ideal of Bush the Elder, and so forth. Henry Stimson, the Secretary of State, also supported the moratorium. So we've got Herbert Hoover, Andrew Mellon, Secretary of the Treasury, and Henry Stimson, Secretary of State, all supporting a debt freeze. So if that's possible, then anything is possible. The sky's the limit. The redemptive action, I don't know. Maybe it's the Holy Spirit. Maybe something can be brought in. But this has got to happen. We've got to paralyze. We've got to freeze, bracket, get this weight of dead finance capital losses, essentially toxic paper that's crushing the humanity off. So here's the idea. This time around, the Depression is behaving so far like it did the previous time around. And again, I go back to 1931 saying that's the most recent historical parallel to what we have now. We are in 1930, 31, 32, depending on the various things that you want to get out of those times. But that's where we are. So go back and see what Herbert Hoover did and try to do something at least at that level, hopefully better. But now, the three waves, the previous time, we've gone through this before. October 1929, the U.S. stock market panic sets off the world economic depression. But this is then followed by what is forgotten. May through September 1931, the collapse of Europe, the Kreditanstalt of Vienna, Austria, the collapse of the Hungarian banking system, all of Eastern Europe going down. Then the German banks, the Donat Bank is bankrupt, the Dresdner Bank is bankrupt, the Deutsche Bank is also bankrupt. And then that leads to the main event, September 21st, 1931, the disintegration of the British pound, means the disintegration of the only world monetary system that there was. That then leads to a gold panic. By February 1932, Hoover thinks that the U.S. is about 2 weeks away from defaulting on gold payment. He gets out of that one. But in June of 1932, the banking panic begins. It begins in Chicago. So June 1932, Chicago banks in panic runs. Then in October 1932, it's the Nevada banks after the bankruptcy of the Wingfield Group. The Chicago one is caused by the bankruptcy of the Insull Group. In Halloween 1932, the Nevada banks all shut down. They will not reopen until Franklin D. Roosevelt arrives on the scene with New Deal reforms. And then it goes on from there. And it goes on, in particular, the Michigan banking crisis. The crisis of the Motor City is a tremendous blow to the national psychology. And then by March 6th, March 7th, 1933, every bank has shut down. So the three waves. The stock market panic of 1929, the collapse of Europe, starting with Austria, then Germany, then Britain, May through September 1931, and then growing rather quickly out of that, 4 or 5 months later, we get the crisis coming back to the U.S., and finally the banking panic of late 1933, second half of 1933, 1932 into 1933. This time around, what's it going to be? October 2008, the beginning of an all-out panic with Lehman Brothers, AIG, Merrill Lynch, and the rest of them going down. Right now, a year and a half after that, on the same 1931, the 29 to 31 timetable, it's 08 to 2010, the collapse of Europe. This time it didn't start in Austria, it started in Greece. We're going to see now disintegration of the euro, disintegration of the European Central Bank, disintegration of the British pound. And what's that likely to lead to? The euro-dollar market is going to be the connection, I think, between the collapse of Europe and the collapse of the United States. The third wave this time is probably a panic run on the dollar, a panic run on the Fed, a panic run on all U.S. banks surviving, and a panic run on the International Monetary Fund and the Bank for International Settlements. That's the third wave. At that point, nothing will be left standing. Enact debt moratorium now, ban hedge funds, ban various kinds of derivatives, and we'll see you next week.